following story took place in the summer of 1996. Ever since my aunt had told me ghost stories from the barn she worked at, I have been fascinated by the paranormal. However, nothing particularly frightening had ever happened to me. That is, until I took a certain babysitting job a few blocks down from me. When I first entered the old stucco mansion, I felt that there was something a bit strange about the place, but I let it slide. The home itself was lovely and warm in appearance. The children were delightful. Two blonde little girls aged 16 months and 4. The first few weeks were fine without any major occurrences beyond the occasional strange behavior of the dog. She would bark at air and growl at walls, and sometimes she would cower in a corner as though someone or something were threatening her. I tried to ignore it, but something in the back of my mind wouldn't let me be at peace in the house. After about a month or so, the parents of the girls asked if while they were away, I would like to watch after the dog, collect their mail, check on the house daily, and be paid in the process. I agreed, thinking it would be easy money. Little did I know how much effort it would take. The first visit went smoothly, and nothing happened, but the second was a bit unnerving. I returned to the house after walking the dog and went indoors for a drink. It was a very warm May day, and I decided to open up the windows to air out the place. After I swept the floor and brought in the mail, I sat down to watch some TV while the dog ran around outside. Suddenly the TV turned off. Perplexed, I got up and turned it back on. As I sat down, I started to feel like someone was watching me from the back stairs. The back stairs had always scared the pants off me anyway, so you can imagine that this was terrifying. As I got up to leave, I heard a loud thud and banging on the stairs, and the voice of a small child giggle. Being the Catholic I was raised as, I began to scream the Lord's Prayer and ran out as fast as I could, leaving the door open and the dog to run amok. The run home is a blur, and I don't really remember anything until my mom agreed to walk back with me to check things out. At this point, I don't think she fully believed what I heard was a ghost, but this would change in time. We found nothing, as you can expect. With my mother's help, I managed to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. The following day, after a night to sleep on things, I felt a lot better and was able to go through my routine without too much worry. Once again, I returned to the house with the dog and went about the usual run of things. Once again, I let the dog out and got myself a Coke out of the fridge. I had read somewhere once that if you expect a ghost, it won't appear, so I felt a little more at ease. However, this is not true. Once again, the loud thuds and laughter came. I was scared as hell, but I forced myself to walk over to the back hall. Although it was a bright day, the hallway was dark and cold. I thought maybe someone had snuck into the house and called out a hello. My answer was the sound of footsteps running towards me. This time, I tried to stay calm, but I still practically had a heart attack, letting in the dog and locking up. The following day, the family I worked for returned from their vacation. I told them it all went great and took my money and went home. When they called that evening to ask if I could sit that Friday night, I agreed, but asked if I could bring a friend. I wasn't about to stop working for them. They paid extremely well. That Friday, I went over with a good friend of mine. After I put the girls to bed, me and my friend sat down to watch a movie she had brought over. The TV promptly shut off, and I began to get worried. My friend as well was looking a bit creeped out. I hadn't told her about the past experiences I had had, and I wasn't about to for fear she would leave me alone in the house. I began to get that awful being watched feeling again, and that was followed by the low giggle, this time more sinister. My friend burst into tears and called her mother to pick her up right away. She said she felt bad, but she just couldn't stand it in the house any longer. After she left, I tried to calm down, but I knew things were at a climax. The rain, which had been falling steadily for an hour, now got worse, and the oldest girl asked if I would sleep next to her because she was frightened. I asked her of what, and she said, "Mommy says it's just the pipes, but me and Abby know it's not." I told her to not worry and tucked her in. I drifted into a fitful sleep. I woke at about 11 p.m. or so, soaked in sweat with the feeling that there was someone coming. I opened my eyes and sat upright. Across from me, there was a mirror, and in the mirror's reflection, there was someone standing next to me. I looked next to the bed, and there was no one there. Yet when I looked at the mirror, there definitely was. Presently, the girl woke up, and the image disappeared. But the terror was not over yet. She was having trouble breathing and could not talk. I called her parents, and she calmed down. When they got home, I told them she had a fever and hurried home. The following week, I agreed to sit for them one more time. I'm a big-headed girl, and went over around 6 o'clock. As you can imagine, after the girls were put to bed, the TV pulled its warning trick, and the activity started full force again. I could hear over the baby monitor that Abby was crying, but the monitor was not plugged in. And when I checked, Abby was fast asleep. When I got downstairs, I could hear footsteps and furniture being dragged on the top floor. I called my mother, and she came right over. She as well heard the noises and was scared stiff. She stayed with me until the parents got home and informed them I would no longer babysit for them. No doubt they were perplexed, but to this day, I refuse to go into their home. Hi, Obi-Wan. I thought I'd celebrate being added to your mailing list by sending you a slightly creepy tale. Don't know if it qualifies as being a full-blown ghost story, but I think it still rates quite highly on the Goose Pimple-O-meter. I appreciate that you'd rather this came to the news group, but sadly, my company doesn't let its minions use them. Anyway, a few years ago, I was involved in the conversion of some 17th century buildings in England from houses into shops and a cafe. These buildings were in an old cathedral town, with many old buildings crammed into quite a small space. These particular buildings were based around an old courtyard and consisted of a large building of about 3 stories and a narrower one of similar height. These were seriously old and atmospheric buildings. The smaller of the two had beams which were reckoned to have been old ship's timbers from about the time of the Spanish Armada, and the larger one had lots of narrow passageways upstairs and a big oak-paneled room. While I helped prepare the smaller building for use, the larger building was being converted into a cafe. Karen, the daughter of the owners of the cafe, used to play alone on one of the upper floors of the building while her parents worked downstairs. At this time, she was about 3 years old, I think, and her parents swore later that they hadn't mentioned death to her in any particular way. All her grandparents were still alive, and she'd never had any pets which might have expired. On this occasion, her parents could hear her thumping about upstairs and called her down. "Don't make so much noise, dear," they said. "It's not me. It's Gabby making the noise," she answered promptly. Like many children of that age, Karen had pretty regular games with imaginary friends, so her parents weren't too impressed by this attempt to duck the blame. "Well, ask her not to be so noisy," they asked. "I will," said Karen. "But she likes making noise because she doesn't get to play much. She says she's been dead for such a long time that she can only come out to play with me." In an interesting development, a few days after this happened, Karen, who had never been spoken to about death, remember, started holding funeral services for her Barbie dolls, putting them in boxes and surrounding them with flowers, saying prayers for the dead Barbie, and generally being quite alarming. She stopped short of burying them, though. Over a few months, the cafe was finished and opened, and in time, Karen's fascination with death wore off, and as far as I know, nothing more was heard of Gabby. However, it's worth mentioning that the staff at the cafe often receive warnings from people who visit the upstairs toilets that they can hear a child playing in the stockroom. If you had told me that dreams can come true, I would have thought you were deceiving yourself. Until this. After my husband and I were married, we tried to have children. My first pregnancy, we called everyone we knew and bought all the furniture, toys, clothes, etc. I could possibly want. I lost the baby at only 1.5 months. So, we quickly tried again. Lost again and again. After 4 pregnancies, I quit telling people I was pregnant. Anyway, after 8 pregnancies, I went to a specialist. He told me I had a chromosome translocation, which should have meant a 50-50 chance of having a baby. Well, 8 of 8 is 100% negative. We were signing up for adoption. We had the interviews, house check, references checked, etc. To get to the point, I got pregnant, my 9th pregnancy. To my surprise, it kept going. On my 6-month visit to my doctor, he was so happy. I thought I was home free. Instead, he told me I now had a 50% chance of making it full term. I went home and cried for hours. 50% chance. What a crock. That is like the chance a coin will end up heads. I was distraught for a couple of weeks. I was starting to give up hope of ever having a child naturally. 2 weeks later, I went to sleep teary-eyed as normal. I woke up gently in the middle of the night. I looked around, and the room was pitch dark. Then I heard the sweetest voice say, "Mommy, don't worry. You'll be able to have me." I scratched my nails on my arm because I thought I must be dreaming. But I wasn't. When I was 8 months pregnant, I had a dream. In the dream, I could see my pregnant stomach. Then a baby's face pressed up against the inside. I could see a smiling baby with blonde hair, round face, and adorable smile. When my son finally did arrive, he was 2 weeks late. He had brown hair, a thin face, and no one had told me babies don't smile until age 2 months. So, I figured so much for that dream. Time went by. My son was 5 months old. I picked him up, and we were laughing when I had a startle. There was the baby in my dreams to a T. His hair had gradually gone blonde. He had gained weight, giving him the round face, and had the adorable smile. Some dreams do come true. I remember it so well, nearly 30 years later. My mother had remarried after being on her own for many years with 2 small children. Shortly after they married, my parents bought a beautiful two-story brick house in the center of a small Idaho town. The first day we moved in was a bright sunny Saturday morning. Gentle breezes pushing enormous puffy, white clouds across the summer sky. It was wonderful. Being the oldest, I made a mad dash into the house, up the stairs, to claim the biggest and best room. Selfish creatures that we are as children. The stairway was situated between the kitchen and the bathroom, and had 2 turns to get to the top floor. Between the main floor and the first landing was a small 2-foot by 2-foot door that opened into what my mother termed a cubby hole. To most folks, this implies a small space, but it actually opened into an attic half the length of the house. After you passed the cubby hole, you walked up the landing, turned, went up 2 more steps to come down a short hallway. Just a few steps into the hallway was another cubby hole level, with the floor that ran the length of the other half of the house. Directly at the end of the hall was another regular door, with my bedroom to the right and my sister's across another hall to the left. Houses of this era weren't built with central heating, but had vents in the upper floors to allow warm air from the coal furnace in the basement to warm the upper floors. Such a vent was near my sister's bedroom door and barely heated the upstairs in winter. Now, I've said all this to give a layout of the upstairs. The door between the bedrooms led into a short, dark hallway that angled off to the right and left, going the full length of the house. It was the typical attic with the steep, sloping roof with bare beams, tucked with aging, discolored insulation. Loose, cotton-like stuff that was easy to move around. The first time I opened the door to the attic, I felt a gust of cold wind, and there were no vents to the outside from the attic. I immediately felt frightened, but then being a kid, I felt frightened of the dark most of the time. There was only a dim light just inside the door, so that no light penetrated around the corners into the attic. My heart was pounding so hard that I quickly slammed the door shut and ran back downstairs. The hardest thing for me to do was to go up those stairs every day. After that first day, there was always this cold air wafting down the stairway, no matter how warm it was outside. My parents began storing stuff in the attic, but before actually putting anything into it, they explored the vast attic. They found an old wood baby cradle that, as near as they could figure out, was from the late 1800s. They brought the cradle out and left it in the hallway, thinking surely little girls would like to use a cradle for their dolls. Such was not the case. It sat in the corner of the hallway collecting dust until well after I graduated. I didn't know why neither my sister nor I ever liked it, but later we found out. Since the house was situated in a new town, naturally, my sister and I ended up attending a new school. Being curious, as are most kids, they all ask where you've come from and where you live. You quickly make friends with some and acquaintances of others. Several kids seemed shocked and amazed that anyone was living in the house that we'd bought. Supposedly, I was quickly informed the house was haunted. The rumor was that the very young teenage daughter of the couple who had lived in the house many years ago had been raped by a local boy who committed suicide before being brought to justice. The traumatized girl ended up being pregnant, and in those days, abortions just weren't done. Although the parents did not send the girl away to have her baby, as was the custom when something like this happened, they did lock her upstairs in my room. It just doesn't pay to be selfish. And worst of all, The baby had vanished and had never been found. Unfortunately, knowing her life was basically ruined, the young girl committed suicide shortly after giving birth to a baby boy. She did this in my closet by hanging herself with a belt from a short pole mounted through the wall in the back of it. For some reason, her family didn't find her for days. The strange thing about the back of my closet was that during my turbulent teens, my mother and I fought constantly. She was emotionally and physically abusive, and the only place she never seemed to look for me, nor even open the door, was my closet. The tiny wooden cradle that the young girl's parents had given her to put the baby in was also empty. The parents, while frantic over their daughter, were said to be quite a bit relieved that the baby was never found. Needless to say, the parents didn't stay in the house much longer after the death of their child. I guess everyone just assumed the young teenage girl had murdered her baby and taken it outside somewhere to bury it. During the first fall my family lived in the house, my mother often sent me into the mid-hallway attic to look for things she'd stored there. I was given a flashlight and sent on my way. It was like being sent into the depths of hell every time I opened that door. I would feel physically ill. The cold seemed to penetrate so quickly that I'd be shaking before I got around the corner. One of the first treks like this into the attic, I was puzzled by the fact that nothing was stored on the left side of the attic. Of course, the right side wasn't full, but it just seemed a bit odd, even to a kid. I just remember feeling this overwhelming sense of panic every time I looked over to the left side. I always felt that someone was over there, yet all you could see was dark corners between the rafters and old graying insulation tucked between them. One day after school, after some egging on from other kids, a friend of mine and I ventured into the attic to explore the left side. I tried to pretend that I wasn't scared, but I was terrified to the point of wetting my pants. I grabbed the flashlight and slowly climbed those icy stairs with my friend. As usual, as I opened the door, the gust of cold air slapped us in the face. I turned to look at my friend, whose eyes were about the size of tennis balls. I just smiled apprehensively and walked in the door. We were both whispering, but had no idea why. We were the only ones in the house. When we reached the edge of the hallway and shone the flickering light of the flashlight across the left attic, I felt like I was going to faint. I was too afraid to walk across the rafters. They just seemed too far apart, and the filthy insulation wasn't something I wanted to fall into. I crawled ahead of my friend, wishing I'd never gotten myself into this. The further into the attic we crept, the more my fear was replaced by an overwhelming sadness. There didn't seem to be anything around, and it dawned on me. What the heck were we looking for anyway? Suddenly, I got a splinter in my hand, which caused me to overreact, and I fell forward between a couple of rafters into the insulation. I barely heard my friend let out a shrill gasp, and looking back at her, I saw she was staring ahead of me, pointing. I didn't want to turn around and look, but she became insistent. Turning around, I saw a few tiny bones exposed by the movement of the insulation. I wasn't sure what they were, but creeping forward and gently brushing away the insulation, we were both stunned to see a tiny baby, skeleton curled into the fetal position. Around its neck was a cord of some kind that was rotting and crumbling apart. I fell backwards away from it, and we both scrambled out of the attic. It was true. All those rumors about someone being buried in our attic were true. Gone was the fear, but it was replaced by sadness of the lives that had been lost so young. I don't know why, but we never said anything to anyone when we left the attic. I rarely entered the attic after that. And shortly after I graduated from high school, my parents sold the house and moved to a smaller house a mile away. Yet, every time I go home, I have to drive by the house, and I always have the sense of someone watching from my old bedroom window. But I now imagine the young girl holding her baby in her arms and looking out onto the wonderful gardens on a warm summer day.